Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1112B, and today's date is October 27th, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Zika Virus Propaganda Just Fell Apart. It's harmless and does not cause birth defects. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, we've been talking about CETA, the TTIP, the TPP, and we know out in Belgium, they were saying, something, we don't want to sign this deal. Now, the corporate media is out there, and they're saying that they made an agreement. And Belgium, the Wallonia area, is now ready to sign the deal. Now, is this absolutely true? Well, we are having mixed reports come out about what actually was agreed upon. And you have to remember, this entire trade agreement started 7 years ago. And they've been working on this all this time. And the U.S. TTIP deal looks like it's dead in the water. And when you look at both of these deals, it revolves around one important issue. And that is the corporate court systems. For CETA, it is called the ICS, the Investment Court System. For the TTIP, it's called the Investor State Dispute Settlement. And both of these court systems, which are outside of the country's government court systems, they sit above what the government can rule. And this was a major roadblock with Belgium. And we can see why, because they're afraid that it would give corporations, the central banks, the elite, the shadow governments around the world, too much power. And it would undermine government's ability to regulate and create laws and to sue corporations. Well, this is absolutely true. And what we're getting from two different organizations like the Financial Times, they're saying that nothing has changed, nothing needs to be changed, they just made an agreement. Coming out of the Globe and Mail, they're saying nothing has changed, but changes are needed. Wallonia might not get the changes it wants. Canada may not approve the changes if Wallonia gets them. So, we don't know exactly what they agreed upon, but this was a sticking point. And we can see that most of the countries were against it with the TTIP, and for some reason, they let this one slide by. And this is the backup plan for TTIP. And we can see right now, this is to create a structure where the central banks, the corporations, have power over sovereign governments. And we can see they're going to continue. This is why they're pushing this so hard. It has nothing to do with trade. It has to do with them receiving more and more power and control of what they want to do. And we need to stop this. We can see there's many protests around the world stopping the TTIP and the TPP, and CETA actually has to be stopped along with the TTIP, because really it's one and the same. Now, we've been hearing for a very long time that Zika virus is spreading all over the world. It's an epidemic. It was throughout the corporate media. There's radio ads that play from the CDC that, call us, we can help you. They're spraying toxins all over the place, trying to get rid of the Zika mosquito. And what we've come to find out is coming out of the Washington Post. Now admits it had no idea what it was talking about, but rather than admitting its own science writers were illiterate propagandists pushing quack narratives, the paper now blames other scientists for the gross error by publishing a headline that once again is dishonest and deceptive. They're saying scientists are bewildered by Zika's path across Latin America. And the question is, bewildered about what? Because the Zika virus that is in Latin America, the United States, and Asia, why, with so many people getting the Zika infection, why aren't there birth defects? this is the main problem. This is where the propaganda is falling apart. So nearly 9 months after Zika was declared a global health emergency, where Obama went to Congress and said, listen, this is an emergency. Biden went to Congress and said, this is a state of emergency. We need the funding. And we know what the agenda was. It's to create a vaccine. It's to give Big Pharma funds. And we can see right now with 650,000 people in Latin America and the Caribbean, including tens of thousands of expectant mothers, we're seeing a very low percentage of those individuals that have birth defects. Now, there is one area where there is a high rate of birth defects, and that is in Brazil. And they can't understand why this is. Because when we look in Venezuela, there were 60,791 Zika infections, 0 birth defects. Honduras, 31,933, 1 birth defect. Guadeloupe, 30,969, 0 birth defects. Puerto Rico, 29,000, 2 birth defects. Mexico, 4,837, 0 birth defects. Brazil, well, they had something like 2,000 or so birth defects. And what we come to find out is that that is the country where they sprayed heavily for the Zika virus. So what we're seeing right now is that the toxins to get rid of the mosquitoes is what is causing microcephaly and the birth defects in babies. And there was a Congressional Research Service report and various sound scientific papers that concluded the following: there is absolutely no sane reason for the scary headlines and a panic they cause. The virus is harmless. It is possible, but seems for now very unlikely, that it affects some unborn children. There's absolutely no reason to be concerned about it. The use of the insecticides, most likely, that is what has caused the problems in Brazil, because they're not seeing it throughout the other countries. And we all said this from the beginning, that this was a complete hoax, just like Ebola that was supposed to spread through the United States, which it didn't. Remember the CDC? They came up with these incredible computer models, which is absolutely ridiculous. We can say, oh, one person's infected, multiply by a factor of 10, and let it just run off. And they can say, by doing this, the compound effect shows us that 6 months from now, there's 6 million people infected, which doesn't tell you anything. It's just a ridiculous computer model. The Zika virus, the Ebola virus, the swine flu, all of this stuff is to allow Big Pharma to create vaccines to receive funding. Period. That's what this is all about. And once again, our government lied. The propaganda is falling apart. Now the corporate media is trying to backtrack, trying to save face on what they've been spewing out there. And we can see right now that this whole entire scam, once again, was concocted by the government, which lies to the people, because the NDAA, in a certain section or a rider, allows the U.S. government to use propaganda on the people. They don't need proof. They don't have to back it up with facts. All they have to do is lie. And according to them, it's completely legal. Until we call them out on it. And we say, show us some proof. That's where their propaganda always falls apart. And we can see right now that corporations and the government, they have melded into one, which is then fascism. We are in a fascistic country where corporations and the government are working together for their agendas, for their goal, for profit, not for the people. We see AT&T. They're spying on Americans for profit. And they help law enforcement agencies investigate everything from the so-called war on drugs to Medicaid fraud and to everything else, all at taxpayers' expenses. The program was known as Project Hemisphere, allowed state and local agencies to conduct warrantless searches of trillions of calls and other cellular data. Again, violation of all of our rights. AT&T's own documentation reported that it shows Hemisphere was used far beyond the war on drugs, to include everything from investigations that reached far away from what they were originally advertising this for. And Hemisphere isn't a partnership, but rather a product that AT&T developed and marketed and sold at a cost of millions of dollars per year to taxpayers. No warrant is required to make the use of the company's massive trove of data. According to AT&T documents, only a promise from law enforcement not to disclose Hemisphere if an investigation using it becomes public. We heard this before when Stingray was uncovered. The FBI said, listen, local law enforcement, don't mention it. Keep that a secret. So we can see right now that corporations and the government, they are working together for their own interests, not for the interests of the people. Now, for years, the U.S. government central bankers, they've been pushing the agenda to track each individual. And they've been working with many different corporations to track individuals. But one of the things they really want, and of course, they're making it seem like it's good for the people, it will allow them to fly on planes, to enter federal government buildings. Well, that is called the Real ID. And DHS has been pushing the agenda to make every state compliant. Certain states are not compliant still, and DHS is warning them that the deadline looms, and they need to get in compliant in the next 2 years. And the Real ID is going to be a centralized system where they have all of our information. It's not going to be state from state. It's going to go to one database where they can correlate all the information. And eventually what it's going to hold is your fingerprint, your iris pattern. It's going to probably have your DNA sequencing. It will have a barcode on the back, most likely an RFID chip. And all of this will be used to allow you to fly on planes. If you don't have it, you can't fly domestically. It will allow you to enter a federal government building. It will allow you, most likely, to get through checkpoints once they set them up. Because we know at this point, they've been preparing the American people for this. And this is why they've been setting up these checkpoints all around. They've been talking about the 100 miles constitutional free zone from the border moving inward. And we can see right now, most likely to track individuals, they will set up different points where you'll have to scan your ID, almost like going through a toll booth, most likely, where you'll go, they'll scan your Easy Pass. Well, you'll go through certain areas, it will automatically pick up your ID card, and it will keep track of where you are. And certain places there will be physical checkpoints where you'll have to show your ID. And we can see that they're preparing for this. They've been preparing for all of this for a very long time, because what they're looking to do is they're looking to have a one world government. They're looking to remove the rights from the people. They're looking to control the people. And if you get out of line, well, then you're in trouble. And they want you completely dependent on the New World Order. That's what this whole plan is for. This is why they've been doing all of this, because they want everyone dependent on them. You can't think on your own. You can't survive without them. You can't eat without them. You can't keep your health going without them. And this is what they've been pushing for a very long time. Now, out in Venezuela, we see things are getting worse every single day. Right now, they're moving into hyperinflation. And when we look at their inflation rate, we're seeing that by 2017, Venezuela is going to be about 1,642% inflation. And we can see right now the Venezuela government, they're going to be creating larger denominations of their currency, up to 200 times higher than the current biggest bill. And the new coins and notes will go up to 20,000 bolivars. This reminds me of Zimbabwe. It reminds me of the Weimar Republic. And it looks like they're heading down that path. This is what it looks like when a country moves into hyperinflation. And if you think this is the only country that this is going to happen to, well, it's not. It's going to happen here in the United States. It's going to happen in Europe, in Canada, Australia. Because as this system deteriorates and falls apart, as the debt becomes unsustainable, and the value of the currency continually drops, well, guess what? It's going to cost more and more to purchase the goods. And all it takes is the countries in the Middle East to say, you know something? We're not dealing in the petrodollar anymore. We'll use other currencies to purchase the oil. Well, all that currency that is in the reserves of these other countries, when that comes back to the United States because they're not using it, we will have a lot more currency here in the United States. Add a lot more currency here in the United States, it devalues the dollar. As the dollar devalues, the cost of goods are a lot more. We see Japan, US, South Korea, well, they've come together and they're saying we're going to put a lot more pressure on North Korea to get rid of their nuclear weapons. Actually, what they're doing is they're pushing to get a war started. We see that more than 80 human rights groups and other related non-governmental organizations have called on the United Nations to drop Russia from the UN Human Rights Council over its military campaign in Syria. Now, the United States is doing this for one reason and one reason only. It has nothing to do about human rights. It has to do with Russia and Syria are liberating that area from terrorists. And the United States cannot stand this. They're losing their strategic location. And when I say the United States, I'm talking about the government, the shadow government, the neocons, the central banks, all those individuals. So they have these different groups calling for Russia to be thrown out. Now, some of these groups are like Saudi Arabia. And we have to remember Saudi Arabia is responsible for the assault on Yemen, funeral homes, schools, hospitals, killing many, many civilians. Actually, some of their atrocities are just unbelievable. After the aftermath of the attack of the funeral, it was called the Lake of Blood. China is a member of the UN Human Rights Council. Indonesia is a member of this council. And they all have human rights issues. And we see right now they are trying to do this so they can stop Russia from what they're doing. The United States government central bankers, they use whatever tactic they possibly can to stop what is going on here. And what's very interesting about all this is that what is happening in Syria has nothing to do with human rights, because the United States government and their terrorist groups, they've been hitting schools, they've been hitting hospitals, they've been destroying the infrastructure, killing hundreds and hundreds of civilians. But no mention of that. Do you really think for over a year and 90,000 or so bombs that were dropped on Syria that they only killed 100 civilians? No. They killed thousands. But the United States doesn't release the information. Other groups do. But the United States here, the corporate media, they don't report on that. We see Russia right now, they're having massive air drills with countries like Armenia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and many others, because they understand eventually what's going to happen is the United States government central bankers, they are going to push war. They're going to provoke, and they're going to push war. We see Israeli warplanes. They're conducting mock airstrikes over southern Lebanon. Now, the government of Lebanon says, we have not given Israel permission to fly jets into Lebanon. So Israel just invaded another country, flew military jets into another country. They're lucky they're not shot down. And the question is, why are they practicing these mock airstrikes? What is being planned? And it looks like something big is being planned right now, because we're getting warnings from the United States, travel advisories into Turkey. We know the Islamic State is being moved throughout Syria from Mosul into Raqqa, then at Raqqa to Aleppo. Of course, they're not going to be showing up as the Islamic State because that will allow Russia to bomb them. They're going to be showing up as the moderate rebels, but they need to make a stop at Raqqa first. And we can see right now that the United States government central bankers, they're planning to have a major offensive in Raqqa, because what they want to do is they want to take the Islamic State, morph them into the moderate rebels, and say the moderate rebels own this area. When the other Islamic State soldiers, paid mercenaries, reach Raqqa, they can morph them into the moderate rebels, and then they can move them towards Aleppo. We see the carrier battle group from Russia. They're saying, we have never planned to stop in the Spanish port of CETA. They never filed a request to the Spanish authorities concerning the refueling stop of the aircraft carrier. So this whole story was completely made up. It was a good propaganda piece. And we can see NATO used it to their advantage. We see right now the United States government central bankers are trying to blame Russia for bombing a school in Syria that killed 22 children and 6 teachers in Idlib. And Russia is completely denying this. And they're saying, well, prove it. Can we see the radar information? And we know that NATO has their AWACS planes flying around this area, keeping track of everything. We know the United States has their satellites right above, watching every single move that's happening there. And the United States can't provide anything. And Russia is saying that Syrian jets and Russian jets weren't even flying in that area. So most likely, as we've seen in the past, this is another propaganda piece, and most likely it was the coalition forces, and as soon as they've done it, they blamed Russia to make their case to get rid of them in the UN, to get them off the Human Rights Council. And we can see how this game is played. And actually, when you look at Syria and what's happening, Russia has been bringing in humanitarian aid. The United States, nothing. Russia has opened up corridors in Aleppo to allow civilians wounded out of the city. They're open 24/7. When we look at what the moderate rebels, the terrorist groups are doing, well, they've been using snipers to keep them in Aleppo. About 40 civilians that were trying to flee, well, they were being shot out by snipers from the terrorist side to keep them in the city. They need the civilians to stay in the city because they use them as shields. They hide behind them. And I see what Russia is doing. They want the civilians, the wounded, and everyone else to leave so they can go after those terrorists. So they have no one else to hide behind. And of course, the terrorists are trying to keep them there. We see the Syrian army has destroyed the Islamic State fuel convoy in East Aleppo, and it's making it very difficult for the Islamic State to fund themselves. And we see at this point that things are not looking good for the Islamic State. Now, we understand that the United States, they are preparing to go into Raqqa, and we're getting a little bit of propaganda from the United States government central bankers saying, listen, we need to get into Raqqa very, very quickly. That's before Russia and the Syrian armed forces get there, because if we don't get there fast enough, it looks like the Islamic State is preparing to have some type of false flag event in the United States. It looks like they're going to be carrying out something. And of course, this is complete propaganda to convince everyone the United States government central bankers need to get into Raqqa very quickly. And they're only doing this right now because they know that Russia and Syria, they're on their way. And we can see right now that Russia is bringing in attack helicopters to Aleppo in preparation for the upcoming battles. And we're seeing that the aircraft carrier, the battle group, is almost where it needs to be. Russia is bringing in more equipment. And the United States, again, is backed into a corner. And Putin is warning everyone that Washington, what they're doing, they're pushing Russia and other countries into a nuclear arms race. And we can see that he's saying that Russia and the United States, we need to come together before the U.S. pushes the entire world into war. And we can see this is completely evident because some of Obama's administration officials openly advocating starting a war with Russia over Syria. The top Pentagon officials are treating the conflict as all but inevitable. Army Chief of Staff General Mike Milley hyped Russian modernization efforts, but declared that they will lose to the American army. And they're saying that, listen, we can have a first strike with our nuclear weapons, and Russia will not be able to return fire. They truly do believe that if we hit them first, they will get no nuclear weapons off the ground. Most likely, most of our ballistic missiles will be intercepted by Russia. They will most likely never hit the targets. Russia will then launch their missiles at the United States. And as we know, they can reach the United States. The United States government central bankers, their goal is to start war. And this is where we are headed. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.